Okay, Mr. Chair, we are live.
Thank you, Graham, and thanks for all of you being with us today. Today is March the 16th. I want to thank all of you for being with us today. Today is the start of our March meeting. We have a pretty full agenda today. But before we start with the agenda, let me thank everyone, because as you know, on the 15th, yesterday at midnight, we were scheduled to receive all of the plans, local plans, all of the state plans, and for all of the entities were scheduled to submit plans. Those plans have been submitted. They are uploaded and you have an opportunity to see them, I think, fairly soon if they're not there already. Let me thank all of the participants who made a gallant effort. I know that it was challenging at times. I talked to a number of you about some of the challenges that you had. We tried to provide as much input or support as we possibly could. Let me thank the State Board of Education, Dr. Audrey, his team, and working with all of the local boards, especially for the tremendous amount of work that went into getting all of the plans in all the time. It's an integral part of this process. We will explain a little bit later about our response to those when Rachel gives her update. But it's just a tremendous feat to see that we've come this far. But we have a great deal of work ahead of us. But this is really important and exciting news for all of us. You may want to say something about that, Rachel, before we go to the full agenda in terms of the numbers and when we got them all in, and how impressed we were with the fact that we got them all in on time with no plans beyond the time frame that was there. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We were really pleased to receive all of the plans well before midnight. So the staff especially appreciated that. And they're all in all 24 school systems, and then the 4 plans from the state entities that were required to be submitted. And that includes the State Department of Education, the Higher Education Commission, the CTE Committee, and the Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports.
Thank you.
They are all posted on our website, and in a little bit, I will just show everyone where that is so everyone knows how to access them. We really appreciated. We know there were technical difficulties, along with just the heavy lift of developing implementation plan, the first implementation plan for the blueprint. So we know everyone all around the state worked very hard on these, and we appreciate it very much. And we are looking forward to reading them all.
Yeah. Well, let me also thank you, Rachel, and your entire team for the tremendous amount of work that you guys have been putting in over the last month. In fact, since we commenced this entire process, and especially since the General Assembly has been in session, the number of hearings, participation, the time that you, I, and Brett have been called to come before various committees is time consuming, but it's worthwhile for us to make the case for the AIB and to explain to a number of elected officials and others what we are doing, our budgetary process, and to make certain that they are aware in the terms of the efforts that we're making to comply with the legislative mandate, because this is a mandate that they provided in terms of legislation. So you, myself, and Britt, we spent a great deal of time in Annapolis over the last couple of months, and hopefully we've made a very strong case for the work that we're doing. Let me take roll of attendance and see who's here. You have a point about to make, Rachel?
I was just going to say thank you, and I really want to thank the entire team at the AIB, small but mighty, and it has taken the entire village to make this process work, and also our partners at MSD. It really has been a team effort. Everyone is present, so that includes you, Mr. Chair, the Vice Chair, and board members, Mr. Manko, Dr. Doss, Dr. Stapleton, and Dr. Lynch.
Okay, our first item of business today is the approval of minutes from our last meeting. We need a motion to approve. I hope that everyone has had an opportunity to look at them. Are there any changes or additions or mistakes that have been made? The floor is now open for discussion of the minutes.
I move approval, Mr. Chairman.
There's a second to the motion?
A second.
Okay, it's been moved and properly second. Are there any discussions about the minutes themselves? Any changes or addition there too?
Could I just clarify that they are what we're referring to as a meeting summary? They're not formal minutes, just so that we don't have too high of an expectation there. But as per the bylaws that were approved by the board in February, we will have meeting summary notes from each meeting for your approval at the next meeting.
Right. In addition, now our meetings are also recorded as well, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
And we have part of the meeting summary document has a link to where the archive video is to watch.
All right, been moved and properly second. No further discussion. All in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposition? Abstention? Hearing none, the motion is approved. The agenda for us today is going to be a pretty rigorous one. Let me just summarize it overall. We're going to have a summary from an overview from our executive director, who would go into a number of very important items for us today. In addition to that, we'll talk about the procurement policy. I think you've seen the draft of that, and hopefully, I think we are planning for the next meeting to actually formally approve that so that you can look at it and make any suggestions or changes. Talk about our recruitment update, our advisory committees, nominating committees, and outcome measures work group, and the blueprint plans and review process. We also have a presentation by MSDE that will be provided, and of course, closing remarks, any of the comments that myself or board members would like to make. So with that, let's get started, and we'll turn it over to Rachel, go through her report. Rachel?
Yes, thank you. Before we do that, I did just want to back up briefly. The very first item on the agenda is public comment. And this is, again, as adopted in the board's bylaws last month. Every month, there will be an opportunity for members of the public to request to address the board. We did not have anyone request to speak to the board for today's meeting. But I did just want to briefly explain the process, and it is posted on the AIB's website. And it's also referenced in the General Assembly hearing schedule, which is where all of our regular board meetings are also publicized. And so essentially, by 5 p.m. the day before a regular meeting, anyone who would like to request to speak to the board needs to send an email to, for right now, Heidi Detterer, and or to the AIB email address, the main email address, and just indicate their name, their affiliation, if they have any, to an organization, and the topic that they would like to speak on. And so hopefully it's a pretty simple process that we try to make it as simple as possible. And then we would, as per the bylaws, work with the chair to determine who, based on whose request to speak, who would be invited to address the board, and for how long, by the next morning, and then they would receive the meeting link to participate in the meeting. So they would know before the morning of a board meeting whether they were selected to speak.
Right,
so that's the process.
Yeah, let me emphasize that this is designed for brief comments, and it's not for a long, protracted debate, but we want to make sure that there's a great deal of transparency. We're in constant contact with the public. So I just emphasize the word brief so that we're not unrealistically build expectations that we're going to have a long, drawn-out debate at that point in time. If an item that you are raising is of such significance or relevance to us, it may be taken at a separate point in time as an individual item but the comment section is designed for brief comments, so we can afford at least a number of people who may want to speak before the board at an appropriate time. And
Yeah.
5,
Yes.
don't let it 5 p.m.
5 p.m. the day before a regular meeting. Yes, the bylaws state 15 minutes to be set aside potentially for public comment at each meeting. Approximately 2 minutes per speaker, but that is at the discretion of the chair.
Okay.
Okay, so then moving on to the update. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is the fiscal 24 budget update. Both the House and the Senate are in the process of moving the state operating budget through the approval process. The House Appropriations Committee voted on the budget at the end of last week, and it is up for debate. It was up for the debate on the House floor today, and they will be finishing the process, I think, tomorrow. And and then the Senate Budget and Tax Committee is sort of simultaneously working on their decisions for the budget for fiscal 24, and they will be voting in the next day, and then that will be on the floor in the Senate next week. And then they'll meet in a conference committee to resolve any differences. So regarding the blueprint and the AIB, there was a supplemental budget that was submitted earlier this month to revise some of the blueprint funding formulas and other funding formulas, not just the blueprint, to in some cases, I mean, this is a common occurrence at this time of year, there might be changes in enrollment or wealth or things like that. There were also this go around, there were a few more significant revisions that affected pretty much all of the LEAs related to the wealth calculation and additional data being released by the Comptroller's Office. And then also there was a recalculation of the concentration of poverty grant amounts and eligibility. And so all of those updates are now incorporated into the budget. The formulas are fully funded per the law. And then in terms of the blueprint fund, you may recall that the budget as introduced by the administration included $500 million from the surplus revenues that were being allocated to the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund to support future expenditures and sort of as a savings account to help pay for the cost of the blueprint in the out years. In addition to that $500 million, the House has added $400 million to be allocated to the Blueprint Fund, so a total of $900 million that will essentially be in the savings account to help pay for future blueprint costs.
Hey, Rachel?
Yes.
Yeah, would that money be one time, or would it be available in the base budget?
It is they're one-time revenues.
Okay.
They're one-time revenues
Okay.
because they're surplus revenues from
Okay. Thank you.
One
Other real quick question. Under the blueprint, local jurisdictions don't have the option. They have to match the state dollars for the various categorical funding elements.
Mm-hmm.
How is that checked? I mean, at what point do we know that jurisdictions have met their obligation?
So the State Department of Education is charged with certifying that the school systems and the counties meet their local effort, which is what you're referring to, their local effort requirement, and also the traditional maintenance of effort requirement. So depending on which amount is higher, The State Department of Education is responsible for certifying that.
Well, so there's a process by which that's checked. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So the $900 million that the House has now set aside for the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund, we will know soon if the Senate agrees with that amount or makes a different decision. And then, as I said, there will be a conference committee to work out any differences between the two houses in the budget. Specifically related to the AIB's budget in the House, there are the House has, separate from the budget, the House has amended House Bill 1196, which was one of the bills that we've been tracking, which, as introduced, included funds for the blueprint coordinators, funding for the blueprint coordinators, $150,000 each. On the House side, they have amended that bill to include a provision that alters the date for the blueprint interim program evaluation. Under current law, the AIB is required to complete that interim evaluation in October of 2024. And in the House bill amendments, that has been pushed out to December of 2026. So they have added a little more than 2 years to that timeline for the interim program evaluation. I think the rationale was that given the later start of the implementation of the blueprint, that would allow more time to actually have some things in place for the evaluation. So as a result of that, on the House side, they are reducing the AIB's budget by $250,000, which is the amount that is in the fiscal 24 budget to support the program evaluation. So that is what the House has done. The Senate, again, will be making their decisions very shortly, and we will see what happens there. And again, if they have a difference, they'll work that out in conference.
Rich, what's the impact of that removal on the review process later? What's the impact of that potentially?
So having additional time for the evaluation, I think, makes a lot of sense. I do think ideally we would bring an evaluator on as soon as we can, so that they are really learn the blueprint, are involved as much as possible in the outcome measures work that is happening. So I think ideally we would not necessarily change the timeline for when we would hire an evaluator. So we potentially would need the $250,000 in the budget for fiscal 24 in order to be able to bring on an evaluator.
In any case, when we get to the evaluation 26, is there some implication or commitment that they would add $250,000 to a future budget to support the evaluation?
There's always the option of requesting a deficiency appropriation,
right.
And also in our budget request for in future years, we could certainly request funding. The 250,000 is an estimate of what the program evaluation will cost, and at least as the Kerwin Commission estimated the cost, that $250,000 for the program evaluation was an annual allocation that over time would cover the full cost of the evaluation. So it's not, the intent was not that it would only cost 250,000, it's that it would be the combination of several years of the $250,000 that would cover the cost of the evaluation.
Have to have a number in order to keep us on schedule.
So I have shared the timing of the extending the deadline for the evaluation doesn't necessarily change the timeline for when the AIB would want to bring an evaluator on, and that the 250,000 may be needed in fiscal 24.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
The other thing from on the budget update they wanted to share is, again, now that the bylaws have been approved, there is every month a budget update to be provided to the board members, and so we have shared what we're calling an appropriation statement, and you all have that, and it is just putting it on my screen so I can see it. So what it is really modeled on what the state budget document provides in terms of the overview of the budget for fiscal 23, and then the allowance, so what the governor proposed in the budget for fiscal 24. And what we provided is the first column is the actual, so that's the actual expenditures to date as of March 10th, that in the various objects, so salaries, wages, and benefits, and you go down the list, 01, 02, 03, those are all objects, budget objects. And then the next column is the full appropriation for fiscal 23, and then you can see the difference or the remaining amount for the fiscal year, and then what is in the budget for fiscal 24. One thing to keep in mind, particularly as the AIB was in startup mode, brand new agency, the 23 appropriation are essentially placeholders that the Department of Budget Management included in the budget last year for the AIB. And so part of what we will be doing as we finish the fiscal year is aligning the actual expenditures with the correct objects. And we'll be adjusting the appropriation for 2023 before closeout so that it reflects the actual flow of expenditures as opposed to sort of the placeholder amounts that were put in the budget. So we wanted to share this with you. Happy to answer any questions or provide more information, either now or in the future. And you can see that as you know, given that we've only had access to our budget for a short time now in terms of expenditures, we have not spent a whole lot of money
Rachel,
from our
did you need to
appropriation
share
yet
your
for
screen?
fiscal 23.
Did you mean to share your screen? We're not seeing anything.
Oh, no, you should have I can share my screen.
Oh,
I'm
no,
sorry.
I see. I thought you were sharing your screen. You did send us the document, so
I
that's
did,
fine.
but I'm happy to share my screen.
No, that's fine. I thought you were talking from a shared trying. Thank you.
I am looking at it on my
Yeah.
other screen, so I can very easily share
That's
it if
fine.
you'd like me to.
I think actually, Rachel, I think it would be good if you shared your screen
Sure.
because there are 52 people watching this, and for them
It
to
is
understand
also-
what we're talking about, it would be helpful.
Sure. It is also posted for everyone. Can you see that? Is it big?
Right. So the first column is current expenditures,
Right, actual current expenditures, exactly.
and
Um,
that 3 million that was a placeholder under
Yeah.
for grant subsidies.
Mhm.
That was was that technical assistance?
Yes, and the Department of Budget and Management put all of that, they assumed that the technical assistance would be provided as grants to the school systems and others, which the law does not specify that. And so to date, all of the technical assistance that has been provided has really been provided through the staff, the salaries, and through contractual services.
That's interesting that I hadn't heard the idea of it as being grants. And that may be a nice mechanism by which to help some of the LEAs if they identified challenges in their implementation plans that we might consider.
Absolutely. One of the things we've been starting to think about as we are moving forward in technical assistance is sort of what are challenges that multiple LEAs are facing versus more unique challenges that that might make sense to provide individual support, as you're suggesting. Exactly.
Is there a process to invite the LEAs to apply for grants? I mean, that's a lot of money sitting there unencumbered. What's the plan for distributing those funds?
So a portion of it will likely be used to cover the contractual services that we're using, to.
And you have the flexibility to move between the two categories?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, but there definitely will be a significant amount of we're going to do our best to move as quickly as we can to and the chair mentioned procurement policy. Once the board adopts a procurement policy, we will be able to move more expeditiously, both for contractual services and to provide grants. So essentially, we can create a process to allow the LEAs to request or apply for grants. So that's something we'll put on the list here for very quick consideration. And just on the procurement policies, we are working on a draft. So you have not received a draft yet. You will receive a draft very soon to start reviewing and thinking about considering the procurement policy, with the goal that we would have that on the April board agenda for consideration. Were there any other questions on the budget?
Rachel, I just had a question about the equipment replacement, because when I looked at it earlier, I saw that it just stayed the same, that nothing was encumbered. And so I was wondering what was going on there.
I'm going to ask Alexandra Vernon, our finance director, if she could explain, but I think the simple answer is that we're not replacing any equipment, because we're just buying. We're not in the replacement process yet. We're still in the initial procurement. Is that right, Alex?
That's correct. And the original laptops and operating equipment that we all have is actually in the contractual services, because that's provided by Department of IT Services through Maryland.
Okay, and so then what happens with that if we're not using it to replace equipment? Is that saying that we can use it to procure equipment or what?
Well, like Rachel stated before, this was just a placeholder that DBM created, not really based on needs that we might need. So we're going to realign some of those numbers so it better fits what we actually will need to serve the AIB.
Okay, got you. Thank you.
Any other questions on the budget for now? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing that and go back to my. Okay, so I think that brings us to the legislative update, which we kind of started with the budget update as well. So it's that time of session where by Monday is called crossover day. So any bill that either the House or the Senate wants the other chamber to consider, the other house to consider, has to pass by Monday, the first house by Monday, and cross over to the second house in order to be referred directly to committee and considered. Otherwise, after Monday, bills that cross over, go to the Rules Committee, which is just makes it a little more difficult for the bill to be able to make it through the entire process by sine die, which is the last day of session. So I want to give you an update on a few bills that we've been tracking and talking about. The first is House Bill 770 and Senate Bill 913. This is the bill that was introduced on behalf of the AIB to address the full day pre-K funding formula and to allow funding to be provided for priority children, which includes students with disabilities, children from families where English is not the primary language spoken, and homeless children, so that any LEAs, public or private providers that are participating in the program that enrolled those students would receive funding for them in fiscal 24. That bill, we did offer amendments to address the fiscal note, which had an unintended and unanticipated ongoing cost. So the amendments were given to committee, to both committees in the House and the Senate, which essentially just make it clear that the funding will be one-time impact in fiscal 24, which would provide funding for these priority children who are enrolled if they meet the income eligibility requirements for tier 1 or tier 2 students, which is, so tier 1 is the 0 to 300% of federal poverty level, 300 to 600% is tier 2. Families that have a household income above 600% under the blueprint law are responsible for paying the cost. This is part of that mixed delivery sliding scale program in the blueprint. So those amendments were adopted in slightly different formats in both the House and the Senate, actually yesterday in the committee. So those bills will be making their way through the process in the House and Senate, and and hopefully should make crossover by Monday. In addition, so they are slightly different postures, so they will need to resolve those differences. In addition, each committee added separate amendments to the bill, to their version of the bill, that are not related to pre-K, but are related to blueprint. So on the House side, they incorporated language from a separate bill that was introduced that added a school counselor to the Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports. So that provision has been rolled into House Bill 770. And then on the House side, they also added some amendments from a separate bill that we've talked about, House Bill 883, which is a bill that addressed various pieces of the career ladder. And the amendments that the House, the committee has adopted, I shouldn't say House, the Ways and Means Committee has adopted, it will go to the floor and go through the full process. The Ways and Means Committee adopted amendments that clarify the 20% teaching requirement for assistant principals, and essentially changes the language from requiring the assistant principals to teach in the classroom, which had raised, I think we've all heard some of the concerns about whether how assistant principals would be a teacher of record, for example. And so the language is clarified to essentially say that they would participate in direct classroom activity. The Senate is also committee also adopted amendments related to that provision of the law, but they did it in a different bill, so it gets complicated. But and the Senate language is a little bit different, so they will need to resolve these differences. So the bills will cross over. Each committee will then consider what the other committee did, and they will try to work it out, or they will go to conference committee to resolve it. there's one other provision that the Senate added to, again, we're still talking about what was originally the pre-K bill. This has to do with a requirement in the blueprint related to alternative forms to be collected for students who are eligible for free and reduced price meals. And what the Senate amendment, Senate committee amendment does is it eliminates the requirement that an alternative form be collected for school systems where all the schools are participating in the community eligibility provision. And essentially that's a federal program that provides funds to the school system for all students to receive a free meal if they are at a certain threshold of free and reduced price meal students. And for those school systems, because they're automatically receiving free meals for all students under the program, they don't collect the form anymore because they don't have to. That creates challenges, other challenges for the funding formula related to the compensatory education formula, but we won't go into that. So that is that is the other amendment that the Senate adopted. So all of those amendments relate to House Bill 770 and Senate Bill 913, which is, I'm going to just keep referring to as the pre-K bill. And then there are some other bills that we've been tracking that have been rolled into that bill or are passing separately. In addition, I already mentioned that the House had adopted amendments to alter the deadline for the interim program evaluation. So that is part of House Bill 1196. And that bill also includes the original language in that bill was providing $150,000 of state funds to each LEA for a blueprint coordinator. The House amendments have essentially made that $150,000 a shared cost between the state and the county government. So the state is not providing the full $150,000 for each school system. Depending on the wealth of each county, the state would provide a share of it and the county would provide a share of it. And that is sort of consistent with how the foundation and other funding formulas under the blueprint operate. And then they also did include a provision that provides some relief for to the local effort requirement that the vice chair was referring to for Baltimore City. And then the last bill I just wanted to touch on is the Educator Shortage Act, the administration's legislation. The House Ways and Means Committee, and it has gone through almost through the full process in the House, did work on that bill and adopt a number of amendments to the bill that some of which are related to the blueprint and some of which are not. They're sort of, blueprint adjacent. Sorry, are you guys able to hear me? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So there are a number of amendments, so I don't want to spend too much time on that, but the fundamental pieces of the bill, which take the Teaching Fellow Scholarship, which has a mandated $18 million funding at full implementation. The program, some of the funds that would otherwise go to the Teaching Fellow Scholarship are going to, given that it has been undersubscribed up to now, are going to be made available for participants, which was something that we had discussed in our working sessions on the comprehensive plan. And also they named it something different, but essentially grow your own programs for existing paraprofessionals or teaching assistants to upskill and become certified teachers or teaching assistants. There's also a provision that was in the bill as introduced and has been altered that changes the high quality requirement for pre-K teachers by 25-26. And the language essentially, there's sort of a both in the as introduced and as amended, but the idea is to provide for a pathway for pre-K teachers to meet the high quality requirement through prior experience and competency, and not just through the certification process. And there's a lot more going on in that bill. That's happy to answer questions or.
One quick question. With the scholarships, they're $20,000, right?
They're full ride, but.
Yeah. So my question is, can they be broken up? Say a student has Pell Grant or something. Can they be broken apart to have broader coverage?
So if a student had need that could be met by a Pell Grant, the scholarship would only cover the remaining.
That's
the
what
remaining costs. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Hey, Rachel, there were some concerns, I think, in terms of accessibility to the scholarship, that there were really high barriers of entry. Is that something that would need to be adjusted by the legislature, or is that something that is that is mandated by MHAC, or what needs to be done in order to make adjustments if needed to the entrance requirements?
So the bill as introduced, and let me just double check here, but the bill as introduced, and I think that if I'm remembering the amendments correctly, the House did not change it. It does reduce the as you put it, the entry requirements for the scholarship, which are in the statute. Just looking real quick here. So that the GPA, the required GPA, instead of being the top 15% of your high school class, you have to be in the top 25%. And then instead of, just looking here,
I think it was a 3.3 GPA requirement, and then a lot of scholarship programs required a minimum of 3.0. And then there were SAT requirements too, and there's not a lot. The SAT is becoming a lot less prominent and for a lot of college entrants.
yeah, they did modify. I'm just looking real quick here. They did modify some of those provisions. The GPA, I mean they actually made quite a few changes to that section of the law. So let me give this a closer look and get back to you.
Thanks.
But it does appear that they are trying to address that. And I think, I mean, there are lots of other bills, but those are the major ones that impact the blueprint. So if there are no more questions, I should say.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Jen.
Okay, I can move on to the recruitment update. And so we have been very pleased to have the assistance of the Department of Budget and Management working with us to streamline the process for the AIB to be able to recruit for our vacant positions. So they have been working with us. It's very administrative and technical, so I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but essentially the AIB will have position descriptions that are unique to the AIB, which will make the process for all of the pieces of the process move more quickly and will allow us to recruit more quickly than the timeline that I had shared with you all at the last meeting, that everyone was hoping we would be able to move more quickly. So we are in the next couple of days, we'll be able to post our first job notice for the executive assistant position, which will be essentially the permanent position that Graham has been ably filling for us since, well, it's been about a year actually. I am sad to announce that Graham will be leaving us in the next 4 to 6 weeks. He was always going to be moving on to law school, but we were hoping we would have him a little bit longer, but we're been happy to have him, and Graham has graciously agreed to do whatever he can to help us transition to a new person taking over many of the things that he does that keeps the train running. And so that is why that this first position, getting this job notice out as soon as we can. And then following our hiring process, we're going to be sharing that job notice, and then we will shortly follow that with the Deputy Director for Operations and the Director of Research and Accountability. Those were the 3 positions that we had identified as the highest priority. But now with this streamlined process that we have working with DBM, we will be able to move more quickly to post the positions for the education policy analyst, as well as the outreach director. So we're just gonna move as quickly as we can to post them and start to conduct interviews and bring folks on as quickly as we can. The job notices will be posted on the AIB website. They will be shared with all of our partners and all of our distribution list, a number of whom have committed to sharing those notices out to their networks. So we're hopeful that the applications or the job notice will reach a broad group of folks, and hopefully we also we've received emails from folks who are interested in AIB positions. We have a list of those that we'll be sharing every job notice out to. So we're going to share it with everybody we can, and hopefully we will get a lot of great applications. Are there any questions about that?
Okay, so I don't see any. So let's go on to the outcome measures.
Yes. Dr. Stapleton and Mr. Manco, could I defer to you both on that?
Sure. So Mr. Manco and I, with AIB staff, have kicked off the outcome measures work group, and Emma Pellerin, who is out there somewhere on staff, has done a tremendous amount of work. The outcome measures work group consists of 9 members who have kindly donated their time to this effort. And we have ex officio members, especially from MSDE, as well as other organizations that really know the current extant data very well. And so we're on an aggressive schedule. We meet every 2 weeks for 2 hours to discuss the measures that could be used, the kind of constructs that we want to measure to evaluate our yearly progress. And then we will get to the point of defining the specific metrics or operationalize those constructs and setting targets later in the spring. So that's every 2 weeks for 2 hours. And then on the off weeks, the ex officio members have met with staff and Mr. Manko and me, eventually me, to kind of talk about that extent data to see if there are ways that we can measure things with data that we already have. We don't want to create a whole new system and add a layer of complexity to all of this. That's not to say that we're not leaving the door open to creating new data collection or measures, but we're trying to make sure that we are investigating all possible ways to measure some of the outcomes that we're hoping to see. Mr. Manko, did I leave anything off there? Actually, I did mean to mention that we do have 2 equity consultants who are working with us and meeting with us every 2 weeks to make sure that we are thinking about every student out there in the state.
And if I could just add one more thing, the members of the advisory committees that as the work group is discussing each pillar, the members of that advisory committee are also being invited to participate in the work group. The next item is if I on my list at least is the advisory committee update. And if I could just briefly, we do want to incorporate this into the monthly report. The advisory committees have been meeting over the past several months, and they are working to have a regular meeting schedule and sort of the third week of every 2 months or what, they're working towards that for regular meetings. And we're also in the process of trying to develop a kind of a feedback process so that some of the questions or implementation considerations that they're raising are coming back to the AIB when appropriate, going out to the other partner agencies as appropriate. So Rachel Amstutz, who is staffing the advisory committees, is working with Mr. Manko on a process that we would then bring back to the board for consideration. And then the last item in the executive director report is the AIB nominating committee. I just wanted to give you an update. The committee received 45 applications for the Mr. Harris's vacant position. And so they are in the process of reviewing those applications. And given that it is the legislative session, that is, I'm sure, challenging for the process. So I imagine that sometime after session ends, they would be coming forward with their recommendations. And just to remind you, so the nominating committee will make selections that are submitted to the governor, and they have to provide at least 2 names for each vacancy. And then the governor will make his selection, and then ultimately that position will be subject to Senate confirmation, presumably next year, given the timing.
But can the person serve in interim capacity once the governor makes the?
Yes.
I see.
Yes.
So we'll be back up to 7 as soon as the governor takes
As
action.
soon as that process finishes. Yep. Okay. Are we ready to move on to the implementation plan review process?
Right.
Great. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see that? Is it big enough?
Yes.
Okay. So what we wanted to talk about is now that all of the plans have been submitted, the review process. And the first thing I wanted to just share with everyone. Oops. Maybe it's, there we go. Oh, it's on my other screen. Hold on. Can you see the website?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So on the AIB's website, under the implementations tab, there is sort of a quick link to all of the plans that have been submitted. So if you click on the LEA plans, it takes you to a list of the 24. Within each, when you click on a school system, right now it is taking you to a folder that includes their the LEA's implementation plan submission. And then for almost all of them, it's taking you to a folder that also includes a lot of other documents. These documents are called artifacts that LEAs were in some cases requested or permitted to include in their plan as additional information to support their response to the question. The intent was that there would be a plan and all of the artifacts would be linked into the one plan, so that for the public and for all of us, we would be able to go to that plan and just then click on links and not sort of have to go back and open other documents. We are in the process of syncing that up. We're working with MSDE so that for all 24, you will just be able to open one document, the plan, and click through to all the links. But that is not working for almost all of them right now. So that's just a cautionary note. We will be we're working as quickly as we can to resolve that. And as they're resolved, we're going to relink. And so eventually, hopefully next week, when you click on, say, Allegheny, it will just take you straight to their plan. And then you can scroll through the plan, and then you can click on each link to access any document that they've used as what we call a linked artifact. But in the meantime, all of the documents are available to everyone through the folder. And then the 4 state agency or state entity plans are available through these links. I mentioned this I think at last month's meeting that the LEA template has been translated into Spanish already and is available also on the AIB website. We're in the process of translating the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan into Spanish. And that, I believe, will be done in the next month. And then we will be utilizing, this is one of the uses of some of the funding that we talked about in our budget that we haven't expended yet, to translate, rather than providing grants to the LEAs to go out and hire their own translators to translate their plans. The AIB is contracting with a vendor to translate all of their final plans into Spanish. Then we will also be considering other languages as appropriate for the individual school systems. And additionally, the state plans will be translated into Spanish and possibly other languages. So that is one thing that we will be using a portion of the technical assistance grant funds for. So I wanted to share sort of an overall timeline for the review process. The first step, aside from getting them all uploaded, is to review each of them for what are called the minimum guidelines. And this is essentially in the comprehensive plan, we identified minimum guidelines, which essentially are meeting the page limit of 99 pages, no more than 99 pages, and having a response to each question in the case of the LEAs, or in the case of the state entities, a response to each task or subtask that required that entity to do something. And we provided a list of those to the agencies. And so staff has already started working on that, but that is our focus, aside from our technical issues that we're going to resolve over the next week or two, so that we can, for example, if, and I'm gonna kind of move back and forth between the timeline and the detail. So this is more of the detail about the minimum guidelines. If anything is missing, like a question is blank, we are going to notify that LEA or state entity and give them an opportunity to rectify that very quickly. But given the high stakes of whether your plan is approved or not, we didn't want an oversight of leaving a question blank, to be the reason that a plan might not be approved. So that is the first thing that we'll be doing. And if there are anything missing, if anything is missing, we will give them an opportunity to rectify that, and then we will be uploading a revised plan. So
just dawned on me here a second. Are we notifying back to the board, or are we notifying the LEAs directly?
we're notifying, so each LEA has a key contact
Mhm.
that they've indicated in their plan, which is on almost all cases is their blueprint coordinator, which is the person that the AIB and MSD have been working with the most closely as they've been developing their plans. So we would notify that contact person, which is most likely their blueprint coordinator, and then they would then work with their school system staff and their board as appropriate to rectify it.
No, I say no. I'm back up. Are we notifying the state board, or are we going directly to the LEAs?
No, we're going directly to the LEAs. We would go directly to the LEAs, and
how would we know? How would we inform the state board, therefore, that we found a problem? Because they may not have found that problem. So how would we know?
We are working with our partners at MSDE, so we're in close contact with them, and we are going to be comparing. We're sort of splitting up the work, and we'll be letting each other know what we found,
Okay.
so that when we go back to the LEAs, it's a request from the AIB and MSDE.
Okay, but they would know that. So you just said okay.
Rachel, this is a similar question, but the process that you're laying out right now, this is something that was created in conjunction with MSDE, or they're aware of this process, so that there's alignment, and the processes are not duplicative in terms of what they're looking at, what they're doing, that the LEAs are hearing something from MSDE that's different from what they're hearing from the AIB, and vice versa.
We are coordinating, and we are trying to not duplicate effort because there aren't that many of any of us to be doing this work, and to speak with one voice as we go back to the LEAs. Yes, absolutely.
So this is, Rachel, this is only on the meet the minimum.
Right. We're just in the
later
minimum.
we're going to get into the actual evaluation of the
right
of the implementation plan.
Right. So this is the first step, sort of back to the timeline. So this is the first step, is to make sure that every question has an answer, and it met the page limit. And particularly for the LEAs, this is important because under the blueprint, 25% of their new funds are automatically withheld in the current fiscal year, 23, until the AIB determines, in this case, it's just the AIB, determines whether the minimum guidelines were met. And this was a provision that was added to the law last year, sort of to deal with the timing of when the plans were coming in and when the funds needed to be released. So what staff will do is we will come back to the AIB and let you know, presumably, that all of the LEAs met the minimum guidelines, and if they didn't, they've rectified it and have met the minimum guidelines, and therefore the AIB would be able to release all of the fiscal 23 funds. So that would be the current fiscal year at the next board meeting. And by doing that, that would mean that essentially no funds were actually ever withheld, because the State Department of Education will be withholding these funds from the May payment. That is the final payment of the fiscal year. So if the timing works out as we've laid out, then the funds would be released before they were actually withheld. But if there are some that need to be withheld, that decision could be made at the April board meeting, and then MSDE would follow the process to withhold those funds from their May payment. So that's just the fiscal 23 funds that are subject to this minimum guidelines process. The next part of the process, obviously, is getting into the heavy lifting here. So in terms of the review process for the plans and determining plan approval, the AIB and MSDE will be reviewing the plans separately, but utilizing for the LEA plans the criteria for success as the criteria that would the plans would be evaluated against. But they would be we would each have our separate review panels or process, but then we would come together to discuss feedback for the LEAs and initial impressions, because we want to make sure that feedback that is given to the LEAs is, again, that we try to speak with one voice as we're giving feedback back to the LEAs on their plans. The superintendent is, MSD will have its own review process that the superintendent is developing. For the AIB, we are going to be utilizing, let me scroll down to here, additional reviewers, which will include, Dr. Stapleton mentioned, our equity consultants. We will also be utilizing some of our other consultants and potentially some outside experts to review both the LEA plans and the state entity plans. We're also going to give the advisory committee members an opportunity to review each of the pillars, their pillar of the plans if they would like to. So they will have that option, and to provide sort of general feedback to the staff and to the members. And then obviously you all will be have the plans and review the plans yourselves. So I'm just going to go back up to this timeline because I feel like it's sort of a good summary. And so from a timeline perspective,
Rachel,
the
while
next
you're
month, sorry, yes.
a good point to mention the preparation for AIB review. Preparation for AIB review, the members, your training.
Yes, there will be.
Yeah.
Yes, there will be. We are working on developing a training session for the board members regarding your review process. And Heidi Dutter, would you like to say anything about that?
Apologize. I'm trying to find my camera to open it up. There we go. Good afternoon, Heidi Dutter, AAG for the AIB, for the record. Yes, we're developing a very generalized overview of the statutory powers and duties of the board with respect to plan review and approval or disapproval. And then any appeal process that also your statutory duties with regard to an appeals process. And then an overview of what other boards and commissions around the state use for decision-making and an appeals process.
Thank you, Heidi.
And we, I'm looking at the timelines here. And before you go away, Heidi, how does the timeline for an appeal, hopefully we don't get to that, but in case there's some problems as appeal, how would that fit within framework of what we have here? Is there a timeline for that? Or you can just appeal at any point in time? And how does that fit in with all the decisions that necessary to be made?
Right. So there are some requirements. I feel like this process has been potentially split a little bit between the next year or two, and then what's going to happen, a process that's going to occur that's going to be on a more annualized basis in the out years. So we'll definitely discuss. I think we will want to put together an appeals process that after the training, you all will discuss in an open session. But there will be lots of options in terms of whether or not there could be some expedited options for appeal, or there'd be just a normal appeals process where things are sent to us and we review them. There's typically a 30-day.
Yeah, the reason I was asking that question, keep in mind there may be the potential that 25% impact will go into effect. Hopefully it doesn't, but it could be. And obviously someone will probably take issue with that. And if that, which obviously 25% is a lot of money, you don't want to have a process that will take for the next forever to get that resolved. And so we need to keep that factor in mind when we are finalizing what that time frame would be and how long we would have to get back and get a resolution, get a resolution to the matter, because it would be a huge penalty for those simply just waiting in some level of uncertainty for a period of time.
Absolutely, that makes sense. And I'll definitely get with Rachel and her staff to determine what options make the most sense for you. We'll present them to you in April.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Hey, Rachel, are we talking about now the second round reviews?
We're kind of in the first round reviews, but it repeats in the second round.
So I have a question on the second round reviews, but I'll wait till you're ready for that.
Okay, so very quickly, so the concept here is the first round of reviews occur, the staff come together to sort of compare feedback, particularly so that whatever is shared with the LEAs is sort of with one voice, ideally. And then the first round of recommendations would come. So the State Department of Education will specifically be making a recommendation to the AIB regarding whether an LEA's plan should be approved. And separately, the AIB staff will be making a recommendation to the board. And then you can see the timeline for that is essentially late April, early May. And we're going to do our best to give you as much time as possible to consider those recommendations. And then the first round of approvals could be considered at the board's May meeting. And then for those plans that are not part of the first round of recommended approvals, the process would be to provide feedback to the LEAs and ask them to revise their plans. They would submit these revisions to MSDE and to the AIB, and then there would be another review process, second round review. And then again, just as in the first round, the board would receive recommendations for approval from the State Department of Education, and then also recommendations from the AIB staff. So you would have all of that information to consider. And the second round of board approvals would be considered at the board's June meeting. And then if there are any remaining approvals, we would consider them on a rolling basis as they are recommendations are made from MSDE and AIB staff. And just for MSDE's recommendations, that applies to the LEA plans. For AIB staff, we would be making a recommendation for the LEA plans and also for the state entity / agency plans. Dr. Kerwin, did you want to?
So just so with the second round of reviews, MSDE staff will be reviewing the LEAs and sending them to the AIB, and our staff will be looking at these proposals and advising the board. Will the AIB staff and the MSDE staff be using the same metrics, rubrics, whatever you want to call it, will you all come together to agree on how you're going to make these assessments and what the criteria for approval will be?
So the criteria for success that the AIB approved back in December when the comprehensive plan was approved, that criteria for success was initially recommended by MSDE, and then AIB staff and MSDE staff worked on revisions to the criteria for success, and then they were subject to the board approval. So we will all be using that criteria of success for evaluating the LEA plans. We are in conversation with the superintendent around how we can ensure that MSDE's reviewers and AIB's reviewers are interpreting the criteria for success and the whether a plan meets approval or does not meet the criteria. We're in conversations about that, and the superintendent has said that we will be talking further about that. They are still finalizing their review process and the rubrics that they'll be using. So we are going to be discussing that further.
It seems very important to me that there be some, we don't want to have people viewing these through different lenses. To the extent at all possible, we want to have the same lens. We may have different opinions of whether or not what we see through that lens meets our expectations, but it ought to at least be the same lens.
Heard.
The criteria for success provides that for us. That's the lens that everybody should look through. Nonetheless, it will not stop people, as you just stated, from having a different interpretation of it.
Exactly.
Also, just to circle back on the release of funds discussion. So in talking about the minimum guidelines, where we're talking about the release of the fiscal 23 funds, the plan approvals are going to be the trigger for a release of the fiscal 24 funds. And so as the board considers plan approvals for the LEAs and approves them, then we would notify MSDE and the comptroller's office, and they would either not withhold any funds or would release funds that had been withheld. Given the timing of the approvals, potentially most, if not all, of the decisions will be made before the fiscal year begins, which would mean that the funds again would not be withheld unless a plan has not been approved before July 1st. And so then the process for the state agencies and entities is similar. We don't have criteria for success for those plans, but we are developing a rubric that will be used by all of the AIB staff and external reviewers that leans very heavily on the comprehensive plan requirements and the guidelines that were included in the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan regarding, needing to address every provision of the plan, providing a comprehensive response, providing specific details on how things will be implemented, and we will share copies of that when it's completed with you all. And again, similar to the LEA plans, advisory committee members will have an opportunity to review them, and of course the board members. And the recommendation and approval process will be similar, but it will not involve any recommendations from MSDE. And then this is just, the materials that will be available to the board members for your review when determining whether to approve a plan or not approve a plan. So I think that covers everything.
Okay, and MSDE does not review like the CTE committee plan or anything like that, or they do? Did I miss it?
They do not. No, correct. They do not.
Okay,
Right.
they do not.
Right.
All right. It's just so important that we get this review process right, especially with the LEAs, because they did a lot of work to get this in and get it on time and follow the template and on and on and on. And I just want us, as far as reviewers, AIB, MSDE, to not hold up the process and to get this right and to work together collaboratively on this.
Absolutely. And we did, the timeline that we've laid out here, this was developed in consultation, discussion, collaboration with MSDE. We are, we're, to your point, they've worked really hard. We want to give them feedback as soon as we can, and, resolve, move forward with plan approvals as quickly as we can, so that those plans, they're not just plans, they actually need to be implemented for the upcoming school year. So as quickly as we can provide feedback and approval, I think that's very important.
Rachel, I just want to express some concern in terms of the number of AIB staff who are available to do this work, as well as the outcome measures work at the same time. And wonder if there's any hope of perhaps getting a search firm to help with the hiring of folks immediately. I just worry that I would hate for any of, there's only 3 of you, to burn out in doing this work and then leave. And so I think anything that we can do to speed up the hiring of qualified staff to help with this work would be great. But I recognize that that's another burden of doing the hiring.
I really do appreciate though, that, and, we can definitely look into that. Absolutely. It's a good idea. And, we are, trying to, bring in other partners and external reviewers to help, support, because to your point, there are not that many of us to do this work. And also for the outcome measures work group, we are working to bring on a graduate assistant. And, you know, to your point, maybe it's not just a graduate assistant, maybe it's someone more with more time, more availability of time to help us out at least in the short term. Were there any other questions or discussion? Stop sharing my screen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's not so much those who will fall within the approval process and meeting the timeline outline that's outlined here. I'm concerned about those who will be challenged and going back and forth in the time frame for getting that resolved and an appeal process for final resolution. And trying to do that by July the 1st may prove to be problematic. And we need to think not so much of those who may be favorably reviewed, but those who will not be. That's where the general problem generally rests, not those that you can predictably see meeting all of the standards and requirements, but those that are outside of that. And if we have to make a determination by July the 1st, the controller and to MSDE about releasing of funds and going through an appeals process, I could see a particular challenge there by July 1st. Looking at the dates that we have here.
So let me clarify. The board does not, there's no requirement that the board make all of the decisions before July 1st. Under the statute.
No, isn't that the time the release of the funds?
So if the board makes decisions before July 1st, then funds will never be automatically withheld because the decision will already have been made. But the statute automatically withholds the 25% until the board releases it. And so the decision can absolutely be made after July 1st. And all that means is that the law will go into effect. A portion of we would need to discuss this further with the State Department of Education, because I don't think that we've talked about it beyond the current fiscal year 23, where MSDE waited to withhold any funds until the last payment of the year, because the plans hadn't been submitted yet. So we would need to discuss this process with MSDE and how it would be implemented. But essentially, the statute automatically withholds 25% of the funds until the AIB determines that the funds should be released.
Yeah, that's effective July 1, right?
Yes.
All right.
But the decision does not need to be made before July 1st.
I know, but what will happen? Here's the challenge. What would happen be County X and County Y, 24 counties in jurisdiction, and 2 or 3 of them did not get approval. headline, AIB or the state or the law have withheld 25% automatically. And what I want to see happen is that we've jumped through every hoop, exhausted every level of administrative appeal before that happens, because that would be the headline. By law, 23 or 20 approved, and you got 3 or 4 that are not. The headline is the law, based on the failure to get this approved within the time of July 1st, has come down on you. Am I interpreting this wrong, Heidi?
So the law is exactly what Rachel just said, which is that the decision you're going to be making is to whether or not to release the funds. And for the next, I think it's anticipated for the next year that's going to be on a rolling basis. There isn't really a specific time frame for that to happen.
No.
And I do understand your concern about the public perception. And I did want to say that for an appeals process, I think our timeline was you received the training in April, you have a discussion in May, and you can adopt, as soon as you have that discussion, you can adopt an appeals process in an open session that occurs in May or June.
Okay, here's my concern. I want to have an appeals process and everything for any county or jurisdiction that they can exhaust that, reasonably exhaust that, before they may be subject to a automatic withholding on July the 1st. That should be our objective. That however we do this, I know it's rolling, as Rachel has indicated, that you can technically approve it in August. The problem is July 1, you're saying to County X and to the public, you've withheld, or the law has withheld 25%. I don't mind getting to the point, but my problem is I want to have exhausted, and they're saying, well,
Right.
we didn't properly appeal this, do anything else, and we're being punished as a result of that. That's what
you won't have an appealable decision until this board actually takes action to say that a plan is denied.
Right.
You
So-
might just not deny a plan
No.
for a little bit of time.
However you describe it, let me back up. I know that you wouldn't have a decision until we've decided. What I'm saying, though, is that I want a process in place that we have exhausted the appeals process we can before July 1. Even though you could go beyond July 1 and rectifying this in August or September. But the law says if we have not resolved this by July 1, then there is a perception, or at least by law, 25% is withheld. I don't mind getting to that point if I know that we've given a reasonable time for a jurisdiction to have exhausted whatever appeals process to get to that. That's what I'm saying. It's one thing to say, we got to July and the community is saying, well, we didn't get a chance to appeal this. And they're telling us we can't appeal this finish the appeal until August. That's where you do not want to be.
So, Mr. Chair, I totally understand what you're saying. Let us think about that and look at the schedule and have some discussion with
I just want to make sure you understand what I'm saying here.
State Department of Education. Yeah, I think that I fully understand what you're saying. I think time is not on our side to be able to fully accomplish your goal for this year, but let us think about what we can come back with as a.
And that's why I raised the question earlier, because I'm looking at the time frame and I'm saying we do not have enough flexible time in here to exhaust that before the hatchet comes down on July the 1st. That's what I'm.
Yeah, if I could just add, so the intent here is that we move as quickly as possible, and we move, for the plans that, are clearly approvable, we bring those to the board as quickly as we can. Then we give feedback to all the LEAs and ask them to make revisions where appropriate, for a second round of approvals. Fingers crossed, there aren't any remaining approvals after June. We've worked with them all, and they all submit revised plans if necessary that are then approvable. If that is not the case, then I think we're going to be pushing up on that July 1 date that I know you have concerns about. So let Heidi and myself and staff and MSDE sort of take what you're saying and see what we can come up with.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so then
One question just on this point. Let's say funds are withheld on July 1. There would be no fiscal impact on the LEA until after the new year, would there? Because they could spend, it's 25% of their funds are held. So it would only be in the fourth quarter that they would be short of money.
it's 25% of their new, and it's not of all funds. it's
Okay, of their new
of
funds.
the increase. So,
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying it's not a significant amount of money, but it, to your point, Dr. Kerwin, given that the LEAs also have their county appropriations available to them, I don't think it would be too challenging, at least for the first July payment.
Right.
Well, I don't want to make that assumption that they would not be in some way, even from a planning perspective or hiring a research perspective, a consultant perspective, because you don't know when you get that level of funds, and therefore you're operating somewhat in the dark, even though you may be able to backfill that to some degree. But I don't want to make the assumption that it absolutely has no effect on the local jurisdiction. That would be dangerous for us to make that assumption.
Yeah, I didn't say no effect, but hopefully not a significant impact in just one payment.
Right.
But they do get bi-monthly payments.
Yeah.
But we hear you. We will do our best to come up with a solution.
I also, if I understand this correctly, like at least the spirit of the review process is this is not a compliance exercise. It's about providing support and feedback to help strengthen the plans. I assume some of this is going to be iterative and welcomed, and hopefully welcomed, and this will be a kind of collaborative effort between AIB, MSDE, and the LEAs in order to improve the plans and make them better. And hopefully it will not get to the point where feedback's given and there's a lot of rancor and LEAs are obstinate and deciding not to make the recommended changes. So I think hopefully this is this exercise is more in the spirit of support and less in the spirit of compliance. And in doing so, we will get to a better place by July 1st, where we're all in agreement on stronger, better plans based on the feedback process.
That was very well articulated. Thank you. And I'll just also add that the statute also does specifically say that each governmental unit, which includes an LEA, they have to keep revising their plan until it's approvable. So, ultimately the intent is that, while it might not be approvable immediately, that through the iterative process, it will get to the place where it can be approved and funds released. If
Okay,
there aren't
yeah.
any
Any further
more,
question?
I don't see any hands.
Okay.
So I think this would bring us to our guests from the Maryland State Department of Education who are here to make a couple of presentations.
Who do we
First-
have from the state? Dr. Collins? Is it?
We do. We have Deputy Superintendent Collins is for the presentation on the expert review teams. Dr. Collins, can we turn it over to you?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. We
Yeah.
also have Mr. Phil Lasser. Phil said he would run the slide deck. Phil, if you're there, hopefully you can hear me. I believe Mr. Dayhoff is online. He also might have been called to, oh, he's there. Perfect. So we have Mr. Dayhoff, and we also have Mr. Matt Duque from our Research and Accountability Office as well.
Great, thank you. And
Phil said he can share his screen. That would be
that
great.
would be great. Graham, can you give Phil permission? Great.
So can I get started, Rachel?
Yes, please. We can see
Great.
the screen.
Thank you. So we're pleased to bring you an update today. And I have to say this update is another great example of how MSDE has collaborated with AIB to make updates that are aligned to the blueprint. Next slide, Phil. So there are two focus areas that we will share updates around today. It's the expert review team and then the neighborhood indicators of poverty. You can go to the next slide, Phil. So for the expert review team updates, the first part that I'm going to talk about is updates to the actual rubric, the process, and the pilots that we've been conducting to better refine the rubric materials. So we always like to start out with a reminder in terms of what the blueprint requires. And again, it requires MSDE to establish, administer, and supervise an expert review team program to collaborate with schools and local education agencies to provide feedback and recommendations with a focus on improving student outcomes. And as mentioned earlier, the spirit of this process is really to provide feedback to LEAs to help them improve their process. And so to recognize where they are, give them tangible feedback to help them improve their programs. So the visits include visiting schools and observing their classroom to determine causes of student performance, look at trends, and then also provide recommendations on how they could improve. One thing to note is if the expert review team determines that the curriculum should be improved, MSDE can offer curriculum options to the school. Next slide. So during July 2022, when we submitted the expert review team rubric to the AIB, we only had two rating systems, accomplishing with continuous improvement and in progress. But after our discussions with the AIB, thinking about the comprehensive implementation plan and feedback that we got from the pilots, as well as reviewing national best practices and research around developing rubrics, we have moved to a 4-level rating system rubric. So we still have accomplishing with continuous improvement, accomplishing, but we've added developing and not evident. And then in cases where the measure and component or the component does not apply, it will be marked as not applicable. And we think that this is just a better approach to evaluating and giving feedback throughout the review process. So in terms of specific areas that we've updated to the rubric, again, using stakeholder feedback, that's going to do some of the pilots, the focus groups we've had, looking at research, talking with AIB. We've added the following areas. So for domain 1 for curriculum and instruction, We've added indicators that look at reading instruction at the early elementary level, in particular pre-K to 3, as well as literacy at the secondary level. And as you know, the superintendent has talked a lot about structured literacy and science of reading. And so we wanted to make sure that that was incorporated because it is part of Pillar 3 in the comprehensive plan. For Domain 2, under student support, we've added in more specificity around community schools, understanding that community schools not only are implementing their plans with efficiency, but they'll be in different phases of implementation. So we've tried to break that out a little bit more depending on where the schools might be. We've added supplemental tutoring. We've added post-college and career readiness and support pathways, progress monitoring, and access to well-rounded curriculum. And then for the Domain 3, we've added under educator support, looking at the initial stages of the career ladder. Again, knowing that folks won't have that set up, and it won't be something that they would be evaluated on, but to get them to begin to think about what might come. Also looking at equitable access to high quality teachers and educator needs. I see Ms. Lynch has her hand raised. Rachel, I don't know if I should keep going or.
No, go ahead and entertain the question now.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, I appreciate the addition of these components, but given sort of what these teams are doing, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what does it mean when in observation and interviews, we're going to be looking at access to a well-rounded curriculum or equitable access to high quality teachers. Can you talk a little bit about what that would look like?
Sure. Give me 1 second. I just want to pull up the sample rubric. Can you tell me which one you picked again?
The two that I had sort of highlighted were access to a well-rounded curriculum and access to high quality teachers. And I'm also thinking about initial stages of career ladder. I guess are these through documentation? Are these through interviews and observations? Like, how are these being determined?
Yes. So one of the things that we did was looked at the blueprint implementation plan template, because we have the criteria that we've asked LEAs to apply as they built their plans, as well as there'll be focus groups, there'll be interviews, and on the actual rubric itself, it lays out what we call as measures. Under each measures, there's bulleted points of what the criteria would be along a continuum. So for example, with access to well-rounded curriculum, it's looking at all students having access to courses in art, career and technical education, world languages, STEM, and other content areas beyond mathematics, ELA, science, and social studies. And then there's a range of different indicators, so to speak, or measures along a continuum where a school might be. And so this is where the training component comes in, where we actually did, and I'll talk about this later, but we train the reviewers on look-fors in each of these different domains that they should be looking at to norm. And then there'll have to be ongoing calibration with the reviewers throughout this entire process to make sure that everybody continues to be normed. And also what we believe will happen, because it happened when we did our pilots, is you go out and you do these reviews, you talk to focus groups, you get the data from the questions, the observations, so multiple data, but you find there may still be a little bit of ambiguity in the rubric measure. And so we've had to make revisions, and we believe we're going to have to continue to do that throughout. So it is part of the component that's really important is through the calibration training and the simulation training that we did last summer. We'll be doing again this summer with the expert review team, again, to make sure that they have a deep understanding of what is meant by each component. Same thing like with the initial stages of the career ladder, just gauging where folks are right now. and in term, because they're still building that, right? That's not built out. So there are specific measures or look-fors that might be asked on the rubric, as well as the discussions with the focus groups at the site actually doing the visits.
How are you determining the equitable access to high quality teachers? How are you doing that matching?
So for that domain, so the equitable access to high quality teachers is looking at students with identified needs and how they're assigned to teachers. Are they assigned to highly effective teachers? So it might be schools are looking at teacher assignments, years of experience, utilizing student data to determine what would be the appropriate placements for students in courses or in a classroom. Some schools may be in a process where they're looking at years of experience and data. Some schools may be further along on that continuum, looking at, again, really informal and formal observations as well, and also looking at how the experience of those teachers might correlate with how they place them in classrooms for specific students.
Thanks.
Next slide, Phil. All right. So this map is just to show you the pilot reviews that we did in the spring and the fall. And kudos, shout outs to the LEAs and the schools that allowed us to come in to pressure test, so to speak, the rubric as we built it and tried to make refinements along the way. But during the 2022-2023 school year, we engaged with stakeholders to gather feedback. We talked with staff, we talked with principals, teachers, central office staff, to really help us utilize these tools, see how they felt, make any adjustments. We did focus groups. We met with small groups, and we utilized that information to make refinements. The schools were organized by regions, grade levels, and population size, as well as the percentage of students within the different student groups, as well as socioeconomic status. And we did use, we trained MSDE staff on the preliminary rubrics and materials that we use. So we had our own calibration of reviewers before we went out to do these site visits. And then once the site visits were done, we came back and debriefed and developed some draft feedback and recommendations. The schools that we did visit, they all did receive preliminary feedback and recommendations. What was nice is during the second portion of the day, we actually had a chance to meet with the school teams at the schools to provide them with feedback. We left, you know, just kudos and thank you notes in the classrooms that were visited as well, and that was appreciated. You'll see some of the feedback. In the spring, we did not get to visit high school. So for the fall visits, we did want to make sure we got some feedback for high schools. And so we were able to do that, which was very helpful. This is just a summary of just some of the feedback that we received between the spring and the fall visits. The pilot schools feedback was sometimes there wasn't enough time to answer the focus group questions. So we've tried to consolidate the focus group questions to allow more time for discussion. As I mentioned, the teachers really appreciated the feedback notes that we left for them. So we'll continue to do that. The schools in central office were overwhelmed with the amount of documentation that's needed, because we try to request some preliminary documentation so that we are not going in blind, but we have a context of the school culture and what's happening prior to. That's another body of evidence. So we also found that holding meetings with the schools to make sure they're clear about the documentation, any way that we can streamline that, we're doing that. And we have streamlined some of the pre-documentation as well. And the principals like the structure of the interviews because it allowed them to provide authentic information about what's happening around teaching and learning in their schools. And so that's a practice that we would like to continue to use moving forward. Based on feedback from the spring reviews to the fall reviews, again, there was a 2-day school review We used, again, another revised rubric based on feedback. We used focus group surveys to gather stakeholder input. We scheduled time during the visit for the viewers to write evidence for the reports. And then there's a classroom capture sheet that was used as well, and we've just condensed it and modified it based on feedback as well. So we have shared the methodology for choosing the schools for the official review. So we just thought it might be helpful to bring it back as a reminder again. But basically the methodology for selecting a sampling of the schools, and we had talked with AIB about this, was making sure that we had that learning loss component, because that is a requirement. So in terms of the first part of determination was looking at the difference in the weighted average percent proficient between the 2019 and 2020-21 ELA and math assessments. And that was looking at the proficiency. And so all those schools were rank ordered, and then like the top 17 were selected, and then we selected a few schools in between. And again, tried to make sure that there was a selection of schools across the state. Also looked at the lowest performing. Again, that was a weighted average, looking at ELA and math assessments as well, and then that they were rank ordered, and then looking at the largest in-school learning gaps as well. And that was the difference in, again, the weighted average percent proficient, looking again at the 2019 ELA and math assessments, but in particular focusing on the student groups. And so we'll continue, the idea is that we will continue to further refine this methodology to inform and make changes to the list moving forward. And our research and accountability team worked on us with this methodology, and we also had consulted with AIB on the methodology so that we were in sync and kind of on the same page to have multiple data points with selecting the methodology. So I'm just going to share an update on the expert review team training, but I wanted to let you all know too that we had received over 400 applicants for the expert review team, and 140 have been hired and trained. And so we do have the number of reviewers that we need. Right now, we've actually started over the past 3 or 4 weeks sending out a questionnaire to reviewers to see if they want to remain and continue. And overwhelmingly, yes, they do want to continue to participate. So that's pretty exciting. But we're going to still have to continue to do training. And we also have a bank of backup reviewers in case situations change for reviewers. Next slide, Phil. So what's to come? Well, this is training that we did. We were able to host the training, which was very helpful to the reviewers, not just in one location. So over the summer and fall of 2022, we trained reviewers separately over 2 days. And we conducted it across the state to make sure that it was accessible to reviewers that lived in different states. Again, we talked, discussed, practice classroom reviews. So they got to look at classroom observation processes and the specific components of the capture sheet, pretend that they were in focus groups. So we did actually mock like we were in focus groups talking. They also got to discuss the interview process and provide feedback. They got to practice the protocols. We did some simulations, and they got to practice calibration. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, this calibration process will be really, really important as we continue to norm what these reviews will look like along the way. And it was nice to see, we have to say all of the trainers were highly engaged. Some of the discussions got very in-depth and heated as they kind of debated what they saw through the simulations and things of that nature. But huge shout out to the reviewers.
Second, next question. What's the number of reviews you have now?
We have 140, which is what we would need to do the reviews. And then we have a bank so that if any of those reviewers need to decide that they can no longer participate, we have another group that we can go to.
And how many are going to each school?
So there will be about 5 or 6 reviewers per school.
And it's anticipated you'll get to how many schools?
So we are hoping that before the end of this school year, we can at least do 2 more reviews this school year. And then we've been creating the other official reviews, hopefully would start in the fall. And so that's something that'll come up in a slide coming later, is sort of our specific next steps of what's happened. So
Ideally, if you maximize the number of people and visit the schools, how many schools actual schools would you get to? The number.
the number of schools. So that really will depend on when all of the materials get reviewed and approved and we could start the visit. I mean, this year, our goal was to hopefully get to 25. It could be anywhere from 25 to 50 to 100 schools per year. So we'll continue to need a bank of reviewers.
Okay, and how many, if you go to a class and a typical, say a middle school, how many classes within the school would you have an opportunity to actually visit?
So during our pilot reviews, we've actually been able to see about 5 or 6 classes, and the schedules vary depending if it's in like an elementary level versus secondary. The amount of time we spend into the classrooms is about anywhere from 35 to 45 minutes. So sometimes also what we've been able to build into the schedule is the ability to see like a professional learning session or a collaborative session. And then we always have to be ready for any changes unexpectedly that come up, where they may be a substitute or the schedule just changes for that day. So we work directly with the schools on the schedule.
Understand. So if you visited a typical middle school and the number of people, the classes that you visit, how would those, which would obviously be the overwhelming majority that you didn't visit, how would they know of because you're taking a sample, I would assume, of what is transpired based on the classes that you visited. How would you know whether the remainder of the portion of the school actually understood or got information based on your analysis and feedback? How would that occur? How would I know that you didn't visit my school and you didn't visit my class, you didn't visit most of my classes, but you visited Jane and Sally's class down the hall? How would I know of the input, analysis, and the feedback that you gave those 2 classes that would reflect the rest of the school?
So what we've built into the process is, as I mentioned earlier, we work with the schools to build out the schedule to make sure there's a range of classes that we're reviewing. And then through the evidence that's collected on the reviews, the school principals, what they do is they've done pre-meetings, like a staff meeting prior to the process, so that the school and community knows where we're going, what classes we're going to see. We're very upfront that this is a sampling of the schools and what the various observation data will be collected, informal and formal. And then after the reviews are done as well, this is why we sit down and meet with the leadership at the school. They're able to bring in some of the teachers and staff of the classes that we've reviewed. They've also included central office. And we provide just a body of evidence that we've seen to those schools. But to your point, you're right, it is a sample and it does not tell the full story, but it does paint a picture of where the school is doing pretty well and where there are opportunities for them to spend a little bit more time narrowing their focus around school improvement.
Well, but in your methodology, wouldn't you or could you not build into a formal process by which the information, the analysis, and the findings in some way are automatically disseminated and or follow up with the remainder of the school and the principal and everyone else? Because I think that would be Otherwise, we have no knowledge that, other than the sample that you got and the information of the sample, that the rest of the school will benefit from the expert knowledge that you've been able to determine. And there's no formal way for which there's a dissemination or follow up to say, okay, did the rest of the school get the information, because they may be doing the same thing that you find challengeable with the classes that you actually visit. I think that would be an integral part of the process, would you not?
Yes, and I failed to mention that each of the schools does get, and it's actually required, a final report of the review of exactly what you're talking about. That is supposed to be disseminated not only to the school community. And so they will get a report for each of the domains that outlines specifically what was observed. And that's something that we're defining what the look and feel would be. But for each domain, based on the focus group questions, all the evidence that was collected, we have to compile that. And we actually practice that during these pilot reviews. We have to compile that and put together a comprehensive report.
At that, I just want to make sure not only that you do that and just sending it back to the principal, but that there is an actual follow-up or some type of trail that you follow to say, not only do we send the information back, but we have an assessment that has been discussed, evaluated, talked about, and followed up in a detailed way, other than it's just simply going back to the principal and sitting on the shelf somewhere. Otherwise, this whole process comes to naught.
Right. And the other piece that we think will be beneficial, and this is some of the feedback that we've received, which is great, is that many of the principals that we met with to say, hey, we want to share this process and visit your schools, believe that this is very similar to their school improvement process and school walkthroughs that they've done. And so the idea is that the feedback would be integrated into their school improvement plan so that everything is aligned, rather than selecting changing strategies and things like that, but really, okay, let's audit what we've been doing. Let's audit our school improvement plan. And it may be a mismatch. So we need to sit down as we do our root cause analysis. We have another level of data. We need now to implement that. And so everything should be aligned and integrated, which I believe gets to your point as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex.
Yes,
thank you.
Absolutely. Next slide, Phil. I think we're almost done. I'm getting there. So not to belabor the point about training, but the training this summer, we've already selected those dates and shared them with folks. We'll be looking at, again, the resources because they've been updated, doing some simulations around focus groups, classroom reviews, protocols, calibration, and again, the writing of the reports, and we're finalizing these dates. Next slide, Phil. So in terms of official next steps, I won't read this to you all, but everything that's in dark blue behind the dotted red line are activities that have taken place up to date. And that's pretty much what I've gone through. And then, so what we're looking at now in the light blue is in the materials we've shared, the updated ERT initial 2022-2023 rubric that we'd like to use, and would hope to begin a full deployment. If we can get to do 2 schools before the end of the school year, that would be great. We would like to do that. And then, but hope that we could do official reviews with the actual reviewers in October. And again, we are going to continue this collaboration with the AIB because it's been really, really helpful with this process. Next slide. I think there's one more slide. I talked about some of this. We're going to use the same methodology as we've used before, refine the resources. So if AIB has additional feedback before we use them, we'll definitely consider that as we make refinements. Have the calibration training, make sure the LEAs know when they would be visited. We do need to submit our updated deployment plan to the AIB in July, so we'll be doing that. And that's pretty much it. I think I spoke to everything here as I was answering some of your questions,
Let
but
me answer one other question because maybe I missed something here in this process. I'm way disconnected with the number of people on the review team and the number of schools that we're actually visiting. I thought for some reason that it far, far exceeded the number that you described. Because I thought that the initial effort was simply to pilot and to get right what the ultimate process would be. But no way, shape, or form did I come to the conclusion that the number of the 140 or so that you described would be the ultimate number that we're dealing with. What would it take to significantly upscale this? Because we have to move this process along much, much more quickly. And if we're not in the school providing direct information to as many of the schools as possible, then I think there's going to be a real lag here. And for me, this number and the time frame that we're looking at is simply not sufficient to do what we need to do. So what I need to know is what will it take for us to significantly upscale this? Otherwise, this number I thought was just a pilot number. I didn't realize that this was the final number. We need to come up with a plan that significantly get to more schools, the follow-up and the methodology that I've just described. You don't have to answer that question now because I think that will take some time to just sort of figure that out and come back and let us know. But just from my perspective, this number is woefully insignificant, not so insignificant, woefully under the number that I thought we would have. And the time frame to get into more schools would be dragged out in a long period of time. And if we can't get into the schools and start providing the proper analysis, recognize the curriculum challenges and all the other things that are so wonderfully displayed in all of the graphs and so forth, I think they're wonderful. But we just simply need to upscale this. Otherwise, we're going to have a huge gap in our ability to transform many of the schools and classrooms.
that is definitely something we can go back and take a look at.
Please. Are there any other questions or comments?
I think Joe has a question.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess some of this is maybe a response to you, because I'm, and maybe I'm just kind of confused a little bit on the purpose of the program, because it was my understanding that the expert review teams were less of a mechanism for like technical assistance and kind of professional development for schools, but more on our end, like a means of kind of assessing implementation of the blueprint. And, I think that the question then is trying to find, well, what is the optimal number of schools to determine whether the strategies are being implemented, and whether if there are challenges with implementation, if the challenges just exist at that individual school level versus a LEA level. And I guess my question then would be to you, Dr. Collins, just around like your level of confidence that with the limited number of reviews that are being conducted, if we would be able to make that determination on whether, if there are challenges with implementation, if we're able to suss out whether those are challenges just at the level of that individual school, or whether, we'll have had enough expert reviews at within a particular LEA to see that there were challenges across multiple schools, and then therefore presume that maybe some of the messaging, there's been some misunderstanding of the messaging from the LEA level down to the individual school level.
So that's a great question, a great point. Which is why with one of the things that we did very diligently is to revisit the rubric to make sure it was aligned with the look-fors in the implementation plan, right? Because we want to make sure that we are getting feedback on the blueprint implementation. And when we look at earlier iterations of the rubric, the blueprint comprehensive plan then the template that the LAs had, it wasn't truly aligned because we weren't there yet, right? So I think that is a good thing now. And hopefully when you all look at the rubric, you'll see closer alignment. I mean, we always can refine, but closer alignment. And I think that'll be good to the LEAs, considering all the work and effort that they've put into their blueprint implementation plans, because they too want feedback beyond the review process that Rachel described earlier that we're collaborating around. They want to get feedback through these observations. So I think that is one good piece. The other piece is through the methodology that our research and accountability team have done. We internally, and we shared this with Rachel and team earlier on, have done sort of a draft sort of vision, like in order to get over the next 10 years, how many schools do we need to get to, right? And so one thing that will be really important that we need to continue to do is make sure we're getting a sample across the 24 LEAs and not just within one area. And we've been working with AIB to make sure that we've been doing that for the pilots, but that will be really important once we do the official visits. And then I believe the first list of schools was around like 17 schools. So maybe between 17 and 20 is like a good number. I think time will tell this year, once we finalize the list of schools, to say, hey, you know, it's now September, October, November. Here's a number of schools. It's not going to be a good sample. We've had these discussions now, and I think we're going to have to continue to engage even after today's discussion around what makes the most sense, to your point, to get a good body of evidence. But to your point, Mr. Mankel, you're right. Like, we want to make sure that they're getting feedback on their implementation of the blueprint plans as well, and to have a representative sample, because this also will provide us with trends, patterns, and themes in the state of Maryland, where as a state we're doing really well, and where there are opportunities for us to get better and provide better targeted and tangible support to the LEAs. So I think that that's something we can go back. Rachel, I don't know if you have anything to add, but I think that's part of our ongoing conversation.
Yeah, thanks. The only thing I was going to add is, and I think this sort of is, you know, a theme, that the delay in the blueprint legislation taking effect, and then the process for getting the blueprint implementation comprehensive plan finished and the expert review teams up off the ground, you know, has delayed things. And so, whereas I think the blueprint envisioned at this point, we would be, you know, several years into having visited schools, and we would have some really solid information. We're still at the starting gate. And so I just was sort of thinking out loud, I wonder if there's a way to accelerate or, you know, visit more schools in the next couple of years to kind of make up for the fact that we're getting a slow start, to the chair's point. But obviously that has a
Yeah, I think Dr. Collins, rather than try to answer that right now, is to come back with, okay, we've taken a look at this, and this is what we can do, and here's the plan or whatever, because that's going to take a little bit of work, because I'm thinking of a fairly substantial upscale of this whole process, and generated much more direct communication involvement in the classroom. So I don't want you to just sort of answer it now if need be, but just to come back with something much more substantive so we can take a look at it and make a more informed decision about it.
That sounds great. We can do that.
Okay.
Rachel, I'm looking at the time, and we do have this. I don't know how you want to handle the next presentation, but
how long is the next presentation, do you think?
Justin, about how much time do you think you'll need?
Well,
No.
why don't Yes, I'm not sure that this is, at this point, we can move it back to another meeting. So why don't we, because I ended up taking a lot of time on the first one and I have some on the second. So it could take a good deal of time as well. So why don't, Dr. Collins, we just take just the first item and come back to the second point, if you don't mind, for the second one, okay? All right, thank you. And thank you again, and thank Dr. Chaudhry and the entire team. Unless you have additional questions for her about what we've covered so far, and please, let's go through that. We'll come back and deal with the second part of her presentation at a later juncture.
That works well. Thank you. And thank you.
Yeah.
Rachel and her team have been very collaborative, so appreciate it.
Any further question with Dr. Collins?
Dr. Collins, I do have a question, and in light of the conversation about upscaling the expert review team process, we may already have it with the AIB, do we have a summary of the composition of the current folks who are on the teams or who have been selected?
We had shared that last year, Rachel. I can resend it again. We did a summary sheet so we could see, we broke it out so that you could see the different positions and where they were from, but I can send it again, Rachel, if you can't find it.
Maybe you could, because I'm not sure when you did share that, I'm not sure if it was final
Okay.
at that
Yeah.
time. So that would be great.
I can do that.
Any further questions, comments? Thank you again, Dr. Collins.
You're very welcome. Have a great day.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, where are we? I have to go back to my agenda here.
That is the end of the formal agenda, unless there's any other
I just
business.
double back again with to make sure that the board fully appreciated the concern that I was raising here, because we, in addition to actual assessments on tests and yearly evaluations, we need to make certain that the best practices within the classrooms and within the schools are being conducted and disseminated to the people on the front line. I know what we said that we wanted to do and the ultimate outcomes, but that methodology of making certain that we get that information to them, the follow-up, and to scale this at such a level that we are really getting to a larger number of schools in different sections of the state in order to make sure we get a proper assessment, make sure that people are following the best practices where possible, and that we have an assessment sooner than later. Again, say that we have to upscale and move this process, everything along faster, because there's a great deal of expectation that we will implement these things, and it's important for us to do so. And it's not an excuse to say, well, we've just decided we're going to only deal with X number, and it could be a rather modest and an easier process to scale this larger. This to me is very important in order to make sure that we are getting that information out and making the corrections if need be, and utilize the best practices that we need to utilize actually in the classrooms and the school itself. And so I've asked her, and maybe work together with Rachel to look at coming back, because I think they indicated that they had a huge number of people who were interested in doing this. What does it take in order to manage this and do more? But I was a little surprised at the number that you indicated. I thought that was more or less the pilot number, at the real numbers. Maybe I missed it somewhere. All right, are there any further questions or comments that I'd like to make? Britt or anyone else? You have any comments?
I'd just like to ask, I'm not sure, I thought this meeting went till 5 p.m. Why didn't we have the second presentation from MSD?
Because as I said before, I'm sorry I didn't indicate, because I've got another meeting that's going to interrupt with that. I have lots of questions on this next piece, and it's going to take almost to 5 p.m., but not longer, in order to get to all of those things. And so that was basically what it is. And it's not something that is required right now. And when we were looking at this initially, the question was whether or not we would do both of these at the same time anyway. But we had them there prepared to do it, so we could deal with it later. In other words, it's not time sensitive for us to do it today. That's all.
Okay, I just worry about
Yeah, I know.
our board respecting the time of the MSPE staff who were prepared to present and then suddenly excused.
Often, and so it's not as though we're calling on every week and so forth to do something. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
If I can also just sort of piggyback on that, if we're going to alter the time, I, as a board member, would just like to know that, because I also had blocked out until 5. And so it's just helpful for me and my schedule to be able to schedule appropriately. So that would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. It wasn't intended. In fact, as I said before, it was based upon how far we would get with this, and that's why it was on, because I thought we would be able to get much more in there. But as I said before, I ended up questions that I asked that probably took the first part of it a little bit longer than anticipated. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Okay, their motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Second, moved and properly second. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Okay. Any opposition to it? All right. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.